Turn the lights on for the Tyler Bright and Early podcast, PBJ Productions' official flagship podcast for all things college football centered. It's episode 2, and it's only up from here. We're going to be rocking and rolling all summer long, talking things college football and a little bit of other things as well. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms as well. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. You can get subscribed to us on YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify. So numerous ways where you can find me and my podcast, Tyler Bright and Early. Let's jump right into it. Let's start about, it's about to be summer break. A lot of schools are getting out of school. It's starting to become summer break. It's already summer break for a lot of guys who are in college. A lot of people getting out, enjoying the summer and the nice, beautiful weather. But also, one of the things that comes with summer break is you have that freedom, which is great. But sometimes it can be a little bit too much freedom. You're not sure what to do. You get a little bit bored. You're like, what should I be doing? It's one of the cons, but that's a small con. You'll take it. You'll take that over having a busy school year. Everyone's a little bit different, but it's a nice problem to have, of course. But let's get into some things going on in the world of college football. So they just recently changed the seeding for the college football playoff, and that being the college football playoff administrators approved a proposal for straight seeding model for the 2025 season. So that just means that just because you're a top 4, or if you win your conference, that doesn't mean that you automatically get the bye. It's just going to be a straight seeding. So kind of similar to what it was, I'm assuming, back in the 4-team playoff. Let's look. I'll read a little bit more into it. So this represents a major change in year 2 for the expanded playoff. Happy trails to automatic first-round byes for the 4th highest rated conference champions, and welcome a less complex power ranking of the selection committee's top 12 teams. That was written by Brad Crawford from CBS Sports. And I think this is a lot better. The main takeaway from this is that, you're not going to have an Arizona State situation, which happened in 2024, which if they won their conference championship, they get the bye. But if they lost, they wouldn't have even been in the playoffs. So this format gets rid of that case. Although Arizona State, I think, ended up proving their spot in the playoff. It's just kind of an easier, it makes it more well-rounded for the seeding of the playoffs with this format. So I'm all for it. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it kind of all plays out. Everyone's going to have their opinion about it. But once they finally see it and it finally happens, it'll kind of settle its way into the norm, if you will. So that's where I think on that. We got another thing about college football talking about how many conference games should you have? Each conference has a different set rules of what games they play in conference play. The Big Ten has 9 conference games. I believe the SEC has 8. I think most conferences have, 8 to 9. ACC has 8 as well. Big 12 has 9. So those are your Power 4 conferences. I think in the SEC's case, it would damage them if they played more conference games, but that's because it's such a competitive conference. A lot of people consider the SEC to be the top conference when it comes to college football, although the Big Ten has a pretty strong argument as well. I think there's pros and cons to it. If you're expanding these conferences to have 16 to maybe even in the future have 20 teams, it may be more of a benefit to have these non-conference games, because the SEC, they were pretty much like just beating each other up last season in 2024. That's why you didn't see as many SEC teams make the playoff as you were probably expecting, just Georgia and Texas. So kind of an unfortunate situation for the SEC in 2024, but obviously from the fan perspective and the media perspective, you want these conference games. You want these big matchups of these teams. You want to see Alabama versus Georgia, Georgia versus Florida, Texas versus Georgia, all these great matchups, because it helps build ratings and people will tune in and watch these games. So there's pros and cons of the situation, of course. I'm really interested to see how it's going to play out in the future, whether the committee is going to, reward some for playing these conference games and then reward others for having non-conference games. College football that's what makes college football so interesting, is because there's so many teams, and because college football has kind of had a little bit slower change to modern playoff formats. If you look at the other leagues and even just in the NCAA, everyone's really had a playoff format for years and decades, whereas the college football playoff only started back in 2014. So But that's one of the reasons why we love college football is kind of having it's always built in tradition, but then it's breaking those traditions and building new traditions. So it's always kind of an interesting fact in that. So moving right along, scheduling has been complex as it's ever been because of this. A lot of people are, I don't remember what coach it was, but one of the coaches said basically that, I would just schedule non-conference group of 5 games if I was coaching a Power 4 school because they're guaranteed wins for my program. Not always, still got to play the game. But a lot of times you're guaranteeing that win versus having these really tough schedule games, especially when your conference games are so strong. Sometimes it may kind of waver the confidence of the athletic directors and the head coaches, whether they want to go full-fledged in these non-conference matchups, have these Michigan-Texas games. It could definitely be a challenge because if you lose those games, you might be out of the playoff, depending on how things move forward in the season and of course, seeing how other dominoes may fall because of that. Really kind of an interesting question. I would love to hear what you guys think. Do you think that you should schedule these powerhouse programs in your non-conference games, or should you just settle for, schedule the smaller schools so they can get the payout, whatever that is, for playing you guys on a large stage and having that media exposure? Or should they schedule these powerhouses so they can have a bragging right to determine who's the best of the best? You can go right either way, you can go wrong either way. Doesn't matter how it goes, but that's kind of what's been going on here. There's been this college football commission that people have been talking about, which has been administered by Donald Trump. And basically what I think this is, excuse me, I'm just trying to make sure I get all my info correct. The College Football Commission, White House pauses plans for President Trump's commissions on college sports, and its congressional leaders discuss legislation. I'm guessing this is because Nick Saban, who was supposed to be the head of this commission, decided to back out or basically say publicly that he doesn't think that there should be a commission. So this is the words, I believe, let me find the quote. Yeah, of Nick Saban. He says, and I quote, "I don't know a lot about the commission, first of all. Secondly, I'm not sure we really need a commission," as Saban said on the Paul Feinbaum show on Wednesday. "I think that a lot of people know exactly what the issues are in college football and exactly what we need to do to fix them. I think the key to the drill is getting people together so we can move forward." This is from Yahoo Sports by Jack Baer. Excuse me if I said that wrong. But it's interesting. Basically, what this commission is supposed to do is supposed to make do some studies of what changes should be made to the sport. It's a sport that's been changed so much based off of NIL and the transfer portal. And I think it could be interesting to see a commission done, but I'm not sure it is necessary, as Coach Saban said. It's just going to be a matter of what's the point of it? What's going to be the betterment of this for the sport? And maybe there is some things that you can get out of it. Maybe there's some that's not. Maybe there's things that don't have any merit or value to it. I'm not sure, but it is interesting. But it seems like it's going to be put on pause because, and I'm sure the big time programs are like, we don't want to. Why we don't need a commission. We love the sport as it is. And of course, the higher programs, I'm not going to name schools specifically because we all know what those schools are. The schools that are the blue blood power programs that control the sport of college football. So it's just kind of interesting to point out. Not sure if it really means much in the long run, but it is something that is noteworthy to talk about. And of course, kind of going back onto the last topic now for college football, talking about how NIL has changed the game, because it really has. If you really think about it, even just with the new EA college football game that has come out it's entering its second year, just made its first appearance back in the limelight since 2014. And a lot of people are buying it. A lot of people are invested in it. As of course, the athletes, they want to be compensated, as they should, for their likeness in the video game. Because if you have these video game companies that are making so much money off of their likeness of it, of course the player should get some pool of the pot as well. But NIL, it's really changed the game. I've noticed it a lot more in college basketball for March Madness, of course, and we can kind of get into that in some later segments and some later episodes along the line, later down the road. But it's definitely changed the game because the the powerhouse programs have just gotten even stronger because they have more resources that they can use to pull those players in. Now, every school does it a little bit differently. Some schools have collectives. Some say that these players have to find these deals out on their own, and every program's different. But it's definitely changed the game for the better or for the worse. It just depends on what your perspective of it is and how you like to consume the sport. And a lot of it probably has to depend on where your allegiances lay with the program and school of your choosing. But that's what I have for college football today. Let's talk about some other stuff going on in the world of sports. Of course, we have the NBA playoffs, and wow, the Eastern Conference Finals between the New York Knicks, and the Indiana Pacers, And wow, it's just cinematic. This whole series is just going to be absolute cinema. And we saw it in game one. Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers just showing why they're the most. It's the two. What's crazy about it is they're the two most clutch teams in the NBA. I think I said in episode 1 that the New York Knicks were the most clutch team in the NBA. Well, the Indiana Pacers might have a word and it just seemed like Naismith was just knocking down every shot late in the game, and just for a team that was really at the hands of the Knicks the entire game. The Knicks had control up until the final minutes of that game, and Indiana was just soared their way back. And, of course, the Halliburton shot right at the end, stepping all the way back to the three-point line, didn't get it, but got the shot after it bounced off the rim and then falls in. And then he does the choke just like Reggie Miller did just about like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whatever. I'm bad at math. And just to have Reggie Miller on the call, it just sets the scene, and I'm sure media loves that, and I'm all for it, and I think we're just getting started in that series. Who do I think is going to win that series? It's hard to bet against Indiana. But I'm sure the Knicks are going to be motivated to respond in game 2, so I'll stay tuned in for that one. On the other side, for the Western Conference, of course, Shea winning the MVP for the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's the best player on the best team, so it makes sense. That's kind of how the NBA MVP award has gone over the years. It's gone to that player who's had the most significant impact for the best team that has the best record. But you can't count out Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's going to be interesting to see. They have Julius Randle too on the T-Wolves as well. That series is going to be really good. I think the Thunder are going to come out of it on top, but I've been proven wrong before. And then we'll have to see who comes out of the East, of course. Let's go into the world of horse racing. Journalism won the Preakness. I told you in episode 1 that I thought he was going to win it, and he did just that. Have to make a correction, though, because I said he was a Bob Baffert horse. My mistake. He is not a Bob Baffert horse in any way, shape, or form. So my mistake on that. But Sovereignty, nonetheless, didn't race in the Preakness. I believe Sovereignty will run in the Belmont Stakes, so that will be an exciting matchup between the winner of the Kentucky Derby and the winner of the Preakness. I would probably take journalism in the future, so we'll have to see. It's definitely an interesting one. I said my piece in the last episode on what I think about Sovereignty not running in the Preakness. Wasn't really in favor of that decision, but nonetheless, it is what it is, and we have to live with that. And I'm not a trainer or a jockey owner, or a jockey, not a jockey owner, that's not a thing, an owner of the horse or a jockey. But nonetheless, I love to watch this sport. And that kind of brings up the question, why do people like racing? Because if you really think about it, it doesn't last very long. The races don't go on for very long. They only go on for I think they say it's the exciting minute and a half in sports when it comes to the Kentucky Derby. NASCAR, it's you just turning left the whole time for laps on a time. But I think it's just the excitement of how quick it is that kind of just gets your adrenaline going. I was just thinking about that the other day. There's so many people who are a fan of racing, and there's different forms of racing. You have your NASCARs in automotive racing, you have your Indy car series, but you also have Formula One, which they're all very different because Formula One, it's more street racing, or I should say circuit, not always street racing, excuse me. But you have your circuit races, you have all these different races across the world that I don't know much about it. I know a lot of people who are very intrigued in Formula One. I think it's really cool. I think it's a lot better than just NASCAR where you're just turning left the whole time, but there's a beauty to that. And that's no disrespect to NASCAR, but, not my cup of tea necessarily, but I love horse racing, which is the same thing, just a little bit different format. But I don't know. That's the question. Let me know what you guys think about racing and is it interesting to you? Do you find it intriguing? What's your favorite racing sport? I'm not sure if I'm wording that correctly, but you get where I'm going with that. NBA returning to NBC in 2025. They're going to get the media rights deal for that, and it's great because they're getting the media deal. I think. Let me check my notes here. Yeah, so for the 2025-2026 season, this is the first time NBC will have the broadcast rights for the NBA in over 20 years. And a lot of people have so much history and tradition watching the NBA on NBC. Of course, we know that famous theme, round rock basketball, round rock ball. I think that's what it's called. You know what I mean? You like that? You like that? Yeah, just a little bit of jingle to that, But yeah, it's back on NBC. I believe Mike Tirico is probably going to be the main play-by-play for that. And of course, Michael Jordan being a special contributor. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean they're going to give him a couple interviews here and there? Probably. I can't imagine that he's going to be a color analyst, but who knows? Maybe they can try to get him in the future. I'm sure NBC would love that, but Michael Jordan, he can do whatever he wants. He's the greatest player in basketball history, from my opinion. Some may say LeBron James, but I believe MJ is the GOAT as of right now. But who knows? Maybe it will change in the next coming years. Also, NBC kind of trying to get more rights in the future. And that what I'm talking about for that is ESPN no longer having Sunday Night Baseball after the 2025 season, Kind of sucks because it's been on ESPN for so long. I have memories watching it, of course. But it is what it is. ESPN doing what they feel like is best for their company. And NBC, I believe it's been reported, not confirmed, so I'm not sure. I believe it's been reported, I'm not sure by who, that NBC is going to try to get those rights to have Sunday Night Baseball. And that'll be really interesting. I'll be intrigued if they're going to have someone like a Bob Costas come in to be a part of that. But yeah, NBC kind of, they've already been the main competitor to ESPN alongside CBS, Fox Sports, and all these other different media companies, of course, vying for rights, and it changes year after year. We've seen it change, over the past years. ESPN getting into the game for the Super Bowl in the coming years. So a lot of stuff going around in the sports media world. And the last thing we'll talk about going on in the world of sports, of course, the Tampa Bay Rays. They had a pretty tough situation, with the hurricane destroying the Tropicana field, destroying the roof, I should say, and that forced them to play all of their games at the New York Yankees spring training facility, George M. Steinbrenner Field. That's also where the Tampa Tarpons play, a single A team affiliated with the New York Yankees. Kind of unfortunate for the Rays, but a lot of this discussion is caused on are the Rays going to relocate? Are they going to stay in Tampa? Are they going to move over to Orlando? Orlando has this, I believe they're pouring in millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars into this possible expansion or relocation, trying to draw in the Tampa Bay Rays in some fashion. We'll have to see, especially with Stu Sternberg. Is he going to sell the team to Major League Baseball and Rob Manfred? Who knows? I think once they figure out this situation and figure out the athletic situation, that they can maybe even consider MLB expansion. And the really interesting thing about MLB expansion, as someone who follows minor league baseball a lot, especially since I kind of, I want to work at that play. I want to be a broadcaster for a minor league team. I think it would be so much fun. Anyway, getting sidetracked. The interesting thing about Major League Baseball expansion is if you have two teams expanding, you need teams for every minor league level to be affiliated with those expansion teams. So that's a total of 8 teams that'll have to be part of that expansion in minor league baseball. Maybe they won't get all of those teams right away, but eventually they're going to have to, you feel like, right? Now it's probably not as difficult as many would assume, especially since they cut back on the amount of teams that they have in minor league baseball back in 2021 when they had that reorganization. So maybe they'll just take a lot of the teams that are independent league teams now, or teams that used to be affiliated but lost that affiliation, get them back into the fold with this expansion if they decide to go that route. But first, they got to figure out the stadium situation going on in Tampa. I'm going to keep my eyes on that. And of course, I think a lot of other baseball fans will keep their eye on that as well. So now, moving in to the last segment of the show, a lot of people having really interesting ideas on what is the next Bristol Motor Speedway. You know, I had a bunch of people talking about, Churchill Downs. You didn't mention Churchill Downs? I think that would be pretty difficult. It would be cool, but there's just so much in the infield for Churchill Downs that I don't know if you could really have like a Bristol Motor Speedway, have a football field there, but you could use the paddock as like a basketball arena or a volleyball arena. I think it would be perfect for U of L volleyball to play a game in the paddock of Churchill Downs. It's just such an intimate area. For those who don't know what the paddock is, it's basically a circle where all the horses are spotted. I think that would be really cool if you had something like that. Of course, someone mentioned a Hawaiian island, having just like a pretty remote area where you could have like a sporting event. That would be pretty interesting as well. I don't know. Let me know if you have any other ideas for Bristol Motor Speedway as well. But moving along, of course, we talked about it last episode, the foods that represent each position on the offensive side. This week, we're talking defense as well as special teams as well. So for the defensive line, and someone mentioned this, he said, why didn't you make offensive line mashed potatoes? Yeah, missed opportunity there. I get you. Why don't make mashed potatoes the defensive line? You know, there's a lot of texture to them. And there's different forms of defensive linemen. Of course, you have your defensive tackles, you have your DNs, which are a little bit different, but they're still very important to the meal. And in this case, for the defense. So I think when you have it going up against the steak, it's a good contrast from the T-bone steak on the offensive line. So you can get your bulldozers over with your defensive tackles, but it's still smooth and savory, kind of like a swim move for a defensive end. So I'm going to go with mashed potatoes at the defensive line. For the defensive backs, I'm going to go with bacon. Now, people are going like, Tyler, really? Bacon? You're going bacon for defensive backs? Hold on. Hear me out. Kind of similar. I know wide receivers are subs and sandwiches, but the good thing about bacon is that you can have it crispy or you can have it tender. And for defensive backs, you can have a man coverage back, or you can have like kind of a zone coverage defensive back who can kind of hold down the fort. So I'm going to go with bacon for defensive backs. I expect that I'm going to get a lot of backlash for that, but who cares? This is my show, and I chose bacon. So now we're moving over to linebackers, and I'm going to go with turkey. Turkey, turkey, turkey. Gobble, gobble. Turkey. Linebackers. That's who I'm rolling with. The reason why I chose turkey is just because it's a very solid meat. And I think it's a good contrast for the defense. You know, you're kind of the quarterback of the defense. You're going up against pizza. You're going up against all these playmakers on offense. But turkey, they just have, you know, they're the commanders of the defense. You know, they set yourself up and they can help in coverage, or they can just bull rush and head straight for the quarterback to try to get that sack. And the turkey can get on a run in a hurry. And turkey is versatile. You can use a lot of different things for it as well. So I'm going with turkey at the linebacker position. Now we're going with punters. I'm going to go punters and kickers. I'm going to rope them together. I know. People probably want, you should make them separate, but I'm not going to do that. Not doing it. I'm just going to make them the same. So where are we going with kickers? Kickers. What can we do with kickers? Oh, I know what I'm doing with kickers. I'm going with mozzarella sticks. Mozzarella sticks, because yes, it's more of an appetizer. They're more appetizing. You have it for your appetizing meal, but mozzarella sticks, they either hit or they don't. And it's how you cook it, and and the texture. Is the cheese perfect? Is it made just right? Mozzarella sticks, it's a perfect appetizer, and that's what you want for your kicker. You want your kicker to appetize you, but sometimes when it goes wrong, just like how a kick goes. It goes wide left or it goes wide right. It is what it is. But that's where I'm going to go with. So that is our food positions. We set them all. We did the defense. We did the special teams. We did the offense as well. I think that's going to be the end of food positions. Maybe we'll do another sport in the future. We'll do the starting five of food for NBA. Who knows? We'll have to see in the future, but that's all I got for food positions. And now the last question that I'll leave for you here in episode 2. who is the greatest two-sport athlete of all time? There's two that really come to mind for me. It's Bo Jackson, played football and baseball, and Deion Sanders, who played football and baseball as well. Bo Jackson obviously got hurt and then just kind of focused more for baseball, and they're kind of known for two different ways. Deion, I actually do think Deion could have been a really good baseball player if he decided to just play baseball. But, he became an NFL Hall of Famer, so you can't really say that he made the wrong decision. There's also been a lot of players who have played both sports in college. Kyler Murray, of course, comes to mind, and some other players who played it in the youth levels, but then focused on one sport. Joe Mauer was, I think, National Player of the Year in baseball and football, was a quarterback, was originally committed to play at Florida State. And who knows, maybe he would have changed what the program would have looked like for Florida State in the early 2000s, because they didn't really have much success out of the year of 2000. And in those early, I think, 01, 02, 03 seasons weren't as successful, at least from a national championships perspective. But let me know what you think. But that's going to do it for episode 2 here. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on Spotify, and make sure to tune in for future episodes. Thanks for joining me on the Tyler Bright and Early podcast, PBJ Productions' official flagship podcast for all things college football centered.